There are moments in life when the heart learns to protect itself not through walls built in anger, but through distance carved in silence. Some people do not detach because they feel nothing, they detach because they feel too deeply. They begin to understand that their sensitivity, once a gift, can become a quiet burden when the world grows loud. And so they choose the only refuge they know, a place within themselves, where emotions can breathe without interruption. It is never an act of coldness, but a response to an inner weight that becomes too heavy to hold in the open. Detachment becomes a way of steadying the trembling parts of the soul. There comes a time when the heart recognizes its limits. Not everyone is equipped to carry emotions in their rawest form. Some hearts absorb everything, every word, every shift in tone, every unspoken expectation, until the inner world becomes saturated. When the emotional load exceeds what the mind can process, distance becomes the instinctive reaction. It is a quiet pause, a gentle retreat into space where the self can reorganize what has been scattered. This distance is not always visible to others, but internally, it feels like stepping away from a storm to regain balance. People who detach often learn this behavior through experiences that taught them the cost of staying open. They may come to realize that vulnerability invites both connection and injury, and sometimes the latter arrives more sharply. Over time, the mind develops patterns that prioritize survival over closeness. Detachment becomes the subconscious mechanism that allows them to keep functioning, even when emotions threaten to overwhelm. It becomes less about avoiding others and more about holding onto themselves. They step back not to disappear, but to preserve what remains. There's a subtle difference between isolation and protective detachment. Isolation seeks to escape the world entirely, but protective detachment seeks to manage the intensity of the world. It is rooted in self-preservation, not self-abandonment. People who detach this way are not running from life, they are pacing themselves through it. They are familiar with emotional overstimulation, with the internal chaos that arrives when expectations, disappointments, and responsibilities collide. And so they learn to step back before they are consumed by it all. This step back becomes their way of breathing. Society often misunderstands this kind of emotional withdrawal. It labels detachment as indifference, assuming that those who distance themselves lack sincerity or warmth. Yet the truth is often the opposite. These individuals feel everything with a depth that few can understand. Their emotional world is not shallow, it is overflowing. And because they feel so intensely, they require space to regulate their inner environment. In a world that glorifies constant availability, constant engagement, and constant expression, their need for distance appears unusual. But it is a psychological necessity, not a flaw. There are people who have learned that not every reaction deserves to be shown. Not every emotion deserves to be displayed, and not every wound deserves to be seen. So they protect their inner world by withdrawing into it. This does not mean they do not care, it means they care carefully. Their detachment becomes a filter, helping them decide when to allow emotions to surface and when to let them rest quietly. It is a form of emotional discipline. They know that letting every feeling escape into the open would exhaust them completely. For many, detachment forms during the early shaping of life. When the world becomes unpredictable, the mind searches for something it can control. The easiest thing to control is distance. By withdrawing emotionally, they gain a sense of stability that circumstances could never provide. Detachment becomes a hidden strategy, one that allows them to move through life without being constantly wounded by it. It becomes a familiar response, one the mind recalls even when the present no longer resembles the past. The pattern remains because it once protected them, and the mind does not forget what once kept it safe. There's also a psychological rhythm to emotional detachment. Some hearts operate like tides, moving closer when the world is gentle and pulling away when the pressure becomes too strong. This ebb and flow is not manipulation nor inconsistency, it is a response to stimulus. When the emotional waters rise too quickly, they recede. When they settle, connection becomes possible again. Understanding this rhythm requires patience, not just from others, but from oneself. The detached person must learn that their psychological rhythm is not a defect, but a pattern shaped by experience. People who detach to protect themselves often feel a quiet guilt about it. They sense that their withdrawal may be misinterpreted, but they cannot silence the inner voice urging them to step back. His guilt becomes another emotional burden they carry. They wish to remain present, yet the world becomes overwhelming faster than they can manage. They fear disappointment not just in others, but within themselves. And so detachment becomes not only a shield, but also a silent apology. They create distance not because they choose solitude over connection, but because they choose preservation over collapse. However, protective detachment does not always mean emotional numbness. Many who detach actually feel emotions with more clarity once they step away from external noise. Distance becomes a vantage point. From afar, they can examine their thoughts without interruption. They can separate genuine feelings from reactions triggered by stress, fatigue, or expectation. They can identify what hurts, what matters, and what requires healing. Detachment allows them to process life slowly, deliberately, and truthfully. It is in this space of solitude that they rediscover themselves. There is a unique strength in the ability to detach. It requires awareness, restraint, and emotional intelligence. Some people chase every feeling impulsively, responding to emotions before understanding them. But those who detach step back to reflect before they react. They understand that immediate responses are not always accurate, that the mind needs time to translate emotion into meaning. Their detachment is not avoidance, it is clarity. It is the sacred pause between feeling and understanding. And in that pause, they learn what emotions truly demand from them. Yet detachment can also become a habit so ingrained that it feels safer than closeness. When a person repeatedly withdraws to soothe themselves, the mind begins to believe that distance is the only safe space. Over time, emotional separation becomes automatic. It becomes the default response to stress, conflict, or uncertainty. This pattern may protect them, but it also prevents them from fully embracing connection. The mind becomes comfortable in solitude, even when the heart desires closeness. The tension between these two needs defines much of their emotional journey. People who detach to protect themselves often recognize the fragility of their inner world. They know how quickly emotions can shift, how easily energy can drain, and how deeply they can internalize the words of others. Their sensitivity makes them perceptive, but it also makes them vulnerable. So they create emotional boundaries that allow them to survive in environments that might otherwise overwhelm them. These boundaries are invisible, often misunderstood, yet deeply necessary. They serve as both protection and peace. There's a quiet wisdom in knowing when to step back. Detachment teaches a person to differentiate between what deserves their emotional investment and what drains it. Through distance, they learn to identify relationships that nourish them versus those that exhaust them. They learn to prioritize inner calm over external approval. They learn that not every battle requires their presence, not every conflict requires their participation, and not every disappointment requires their breakdown. Detachment becomes a form of emotional minimalism, a way of removing unnecessary burdens so the heart can focus on what truly matters. People who detach often feel emotions that others rarely notice. They pick up on the unspoken, the subtle shifts, the quiet disappointments that linger between words. This emotional awareness is both their strength and their challenge. It gives them insight into the world, but it also overwhelms them with details they never asked for. Detachment becomes their way of managing this sensitivity. It allows them to filter what they absorb, to decide what deserves space within them and what should be released. It empowers them to navigate life without drowning in emotional noise. At its core, detachment is a search for inner peace. Not the absence of emotion, but the balance of it. People who detach want stability, a stillness that allows them to understand their feelings without being consumed by them. They long for emotional quiet, especially when their inner world becomes too loud. And so they prioritize peace over presence, even if it comes at the cost of being misunderstood. Their detachment is not a rejection of the world, it is a pursuit of calm within it. Eventually, the detached soul begins to realize that distance is not always a solution, but a temporary refuge. The heart cannot remain hidden forever. Human connection requires openness, and openness requires vulnerability. And while detachment may protect, it also limits. It keeps emotions manageable but prevents them from being fully experienced. This realization arrives slowly, gently, often during moments of introspection. It becomes clear that the goal is not to detach permanently, but to learn how to feel safely. In the end, detachment becomes less about escaping emotions and more about understanding them. It becomes a practice of listening to the self, honoring emotional limits, and creating space for reflection. Those who detach to protect themselves are not weak or cold or distant by nature. They are individuals who have learned, often through difficult experiences, that their inner world requires careful tending. And through this distance, they continue to learn the delicate balance between protecting their hearts and allowing them to stay open. There comes a point in every journey of emotional self-protection when the quiet distance that once felt comforting begins to feel like a landscape where echoes linger longer than voices. Those who detach to guard their inner world eventually notice the spaces they create, spaces shaped not out of rejection but out of necessity. In these spaces, the mind becomes a patient observer, noticing patterns that were once hidden beneath noise. Over time, this distance reveals truths that could never be seen while standing too close. It teaches that some emotions need room to breathe, and some wounds need silence more than explanations. Yet it also awakens an awareness that distance can become a habit so familiar that returning from it requires courage. The mind begins to question whether it is protecting itself or prolonging a state of emotional suspension where nothing hurts, but nothing grows either. Protective detachment unfolds in layers, much like the turning of seasons. There are moments when the mind retracts to shield itself from a sudden emotional impact. Other times, distance grows slowly, like dusk settling over a landscape. These gradual retreats are not deliberate choices. They are responses shaped by weariness, overstimulation, or emotional saturation. With time, a detached soul learns that distancing is not only a reaction, but also a rhythm, a psychological pulse that dictates when to step back and when to move forward. This rhythm becomes a compass for navigating discomfort, helping the heart avoid emotional overload. Yet in its wisdom, the psyche also recognizes that a compass cannot become a cage. A life lived entirely at a distance loses its richness, its warmth, and its capacity for connection. People who detach often spend long periods navigating their inner world with quiet introspection. They become fluent in their own emotional landscapes, recognizing the subtle shifts that precede overwhelm. This internal awareness grants them a form of emotional foresight, a sense of when to retreat before chaos arrives. Yet this protective intuition sometimes grows so strong that it anticipates pain even where none exists. The mind begins to guard itself from imagined threats, from possible disappointments, from potential conflicts that may never occur. This is where the psychological balance becomes delicate. Detachment provides safety, but too much safety becomes a form of self-limitation, reducing the fullness of human experience to only what feels risk-free, and life rarely unfolds meaningfully without risk. There's a quiet transformation that occurs when a detached soul begins to understand the difference between protection and avoidance. Protection arises from wisdom, avoidance arises from fear. Protection allows a person to regulate what enters their emotional space, while avoidance prevents anything of significance from entering at all. This realization does not come suddenly. It arrives like a soft whisper during moments of reflection. The mind begins to see that healing does not require closing every door. It requires opening some, cautiously, intentionally, and at a pace that honors one's own emotional capacity. Protective detachment becomes healthier when it evolves from absolute withdrawal to selective openness, where connection is allowed but not forced, and vulnerability is offered but not surrendered entirely. The psychology of detachment is deeply intertwined with the human desire for safety. Emotional safety is not merely the absence of conflict. It is the presence of understanding, validation, and inner stability. Those who detach often do so because the world has shown them that safety cannot always be guaranteed externally. As a result, they learn to create it internally. They build mental spaces where they can retreat, reorganize their thoughts, and rest from the demands of emotional engagement. In these self-made sanctuaries, feelings become clearer, thoughts become quieter, and identity becomes more grounded. Yet the heart eventually realizes that inner safety is strongest when supported by relationships capable of holding it, not replacing it. True safety is a balance, half built within oneself and half nurtured through healthy, meaningful bonds. Many people who detach carry a history of giving more than they received. Their retreat becomes a response to emotional overextension, a way of recalibrating from imbalance. They have often been the ones who listened more than they spoke, who comforted more than they were comforted. Understood others more deeply than they were understood in return. Eventually, this emotional unevenness becomes exhausting. The heart grows tired of being stretched, and the mind begins to conserve energy by withdrawing. Detachment becomes a reset button, allowing them to reclaim parts of themselves lost in constant giving. In this quiet distance, they rediscover boundaries that define not only how much they are willing to give, but also how much they deserve to receive. As the detached person grows more attuned to their own emotional needs, they begin to recognize how society often misinterprets stillness, silence, and withdrawal. The world tends to reward loud expression and visible engagement, overlooking the profound inner work happening within those who choose quiet introspection. The pressure to remain constantly accessible can make distance seem like defiance, even when it arises from self-care. This societal misunderstanding places an additional burden on the detached mind, making them feel as though they must justify their silence. Yet true emotional maturity includes recognizing that not every quiet moment needs defending. Some silences belong to healing, some distances belong to clarity, and some withdrawals belong to the preservation of inner peace. Over time, a detached soul begins to understand that emotional protection is not the same as emotional suppression. Detachment does not erase feelings. It holds them gently until they can be handled safely. The heart learns that suppressed emotions return with greater force, while protected emotions return with greater understanding. In this realization, detachment becomes a tool rather than a trap. The mind starts using distance strategically, stepping back not to disconnect, but to gain perspective. Stepping back not to avoid pain, but to process it without collapse. Stepping back not to shut out the world, but to prepare for healthier re-entry into it. With this shift, detachment becomes more conscious, more balanced, and more aligned with growth. There is a graceful strength in those who detach with awareness. They learn that emotional boundaries are not walls, but filters. These filters allow warmth to enter while keeping chaos at a distance. They allow connection without overwhelm, closeness without loss of self, and empathy without emotional drowning. With time, the detached mind begins to practice a form of selective vulnerability, revealing parts of itself gradually to people who demonstrate emotional safety. This kind of vulnerability is not impulsive, it is intentional. It becomes an offering rather than an expectation. Through this, connection becomes more authentic, relationships become more balanced, and the self becomes more honored. As healing continues, individuals who once relied heavily on detachment begin to explore what it means to remain present without losing themselves. Presence, they discover, is not the opposite of protection. It is the evolution of it. To be present while emotionally grounded is to experience life without being consumed by it. It is to feel deeply without collapsing, to connect meaningfully without merging identities, and to engage openly without sacrificing emotional stability. Presence becomes a new form of self-protection, one that does not require distance to feel safe. It is the culmination of inner work, introspection, and emotional awareness. Eventually, the heart begins to recognize that not every closeness is dangerous and not every distance is healing. Some moments require leaning in rather than stepping back. Some experiences demand engagement rather than silence. Some emotions need expression rather than solitude. The detached soul learns that balance is not found in constant withdrawal nor in constant openness, but in the gentle interplay between the two. This interplay becomes a lifelong practice, a dance between the need for safety and the desire for connection. In mastering this balance, emotional resilience is born. Through this journey, a profound realization